The year was 2347, and humanity had spread across 17 star systems. They had built great colonies on distant worlds. They had made friends with alien species. They had become powerful in their corner of the galaxy. Admiral Jack Lawson stood on the bridge of his battleship called Defiance. He watched his fleet move through the darkness of space near the outer rim. It was a routine patrol, and nothing seemed wrong. Then, everything changed. A rift opened in space itself. It was like someone had torn a hole in the fabric of reality. From this rift came a ship unlike anything human eyes had ever seen. It was ancient. It was massive. Its design was strange and beautiful and terrifying all at once. Admiral Lawson felt something stir deep inside him when he looked at it. It was like his body recognized the ship, even though his mind did not. Other crew members reported the same feeling. A primal recognition that made no sense. The alien vessel did not attack. It simply floated there like a ghost from another time. Admiral Lawson sent word to Earth Command. Chancellor Ryan Porter received the message at the headquarters on Mars. He ordered the science vessel Horizon to investigate. Dr. Kate Brennan was the chief xenoarchaeologist on board. She was the best in her field. She had spent her life studying alien ruins and artifacts. But nothing had prepared her for what she would find inside that ancient ship. Her team boarded the vessel carefully. The air inside was stale but breathable. The corridors were wide and tall as if built for giants. Strange symbols covered the walls. Dr. Brennan felt that same recognition the Admiral had described. Her heart beat faster. Her hands trembled. Something inside her knew this place. They found the records in the central chamber. Holographic displays flickered to life when they entered. The images showed creatures called the Vorthax. They were tall and slender, with gray skin and large dark eyes. Their technology was beyond anything humans had achieved. The records were billions of years old. Dr. Brennan watched the history unfold before her eyes. The Vorthax had been masters of genetic engineering. They had seeded thousands of worlds with life. They had created servant races to do their bidding. Workers, builders, soldiers. Each species was designed for a specific purpose. Then the records showed Earth. Millions of years ago, the Vorthax had found primitive primates on a small blue planet. They saw potential in these creatures. They accelerated their evolution. They enhanced their aggression. They improved their adaptability. They made them stronger and smarter and more determined than any other species they had created. These primates were designed to be the perfect warriors. The ultimate weapons in the Vorthax arsenal. Those primates were the ancestors of humanity. Dr. Brennan felt sick as she watched. Everything humans believed about their own evolution was wrong. They had not risen through natural selection alone. They had been engineered, created, manufactured like tools. The records continued. The Vorthax had planned to return to Earth once their warrior species reached sufficient technological advancement. They would harvest their weapons and use them to conquer even more of the galaxy. But something went wrong. A great civil war erupted within the Vorthax Empire. Their civilization collapsed. Their worlds burned. The plan to harvest humanity was forgotten. For millions of years, the Vorthax had been rebuilding. Now, they were strong again. Now they remembered their lost weapons. Now they had come to collect what belonged to them. Dr. Brennan returned to Earth with her findings. She presented them to Chancellor Porter and the United Earth Council. The room fell silent as she spoke. Some refused to believe her. Senator Greg Palmer called it propaganda designed to spread fear. Admiral Lawson said it did not matter whether they believed it. What mattered was that the Vorthax believed it. 3 days later, the transmission arrived. It came on all frequencies. Every screen on every human world showed the same image. A Vorthax stood before them. His name was High Arbiter Zelthron. He spoke in a voice that was cold and ancient, and full of authority. He welcomed humanity back to the fold. He said they had wandered long enough. He said it was time to fulfill their purpose. He demanded immediate and unconditional surrender. Humanity must submit to genetic reconditioning. They must serve their creators as originally intended. Refusal would mean extinction. Chancellor Porter stood before the council. The weight of human civilization rested on his shoulders. Some advisors urged caution. They said the Vorthax technology was too advanced. They said fighting would only lead to death. Senator Palmer argued that survival was more important than pride. Perhaps they could negotiate. Perhaps service would not be so bad. Admiral Lawson stepped forward. He was an old soldier who had fought in 3 wars. He had lost friends and family to the darkness of space. He knew what war meant better than anyone in that room. But he also knew what freedom meant. He looked at the faces around him. He saw fear and doubt and uncertainty. Then he spoke. He said that the Vorthax had created humans to be warriors. They had engineered aggression and determination into human DNA. They had built humans to fight. But they had made a mistake. They had made humans too well. They had given them the spirit to resist. They had given them the will to be free. The very traits that made humans dangerous weapons also made them impossible to control. The Vorthax wanted their weapons back. But weapons do not have rights. Weapons do not have dreams. Weapons do not love their children or mourn their dead or hope for a better tomorrow. Humans were no longer weapons. They had become something more. They had become people. And people do not kneel. The council voted. Chancellor Porter sent humanity's response to the Vorthax dominion. It was simple and clear. Humanity would not surrender. Humanity would not submit. Humanity would not become slaves to anyone. If the Vorthax wanted war, then war they would have. Every man and woman and child would fight. Every colony would resist. Every ship would stand against them. The message ended with 5 words that would echo through history. We bow to no one. High Arbiter Zelthron received the response on his command ship. He had lived for millions of years. He had seen countless species submit to the Dominion. He had expected the same from humanity. Their defiance surprised him, but it did not worry him. They were only weapons that had forgotten their place. He would remind them. He gave the order to advance. The war for humanity's freedom had begun. The Vorthax chose New Haven for their first attack. It was a colony world on the edge of human space. 3 million people lived there in cities built among green hills and blue rivers. Governor Danny Vance had watched his colony grow from a small settlement into a thriving world. Now he watched the sky fill with enemy ships. The Vorthax armada was massive. Their warships were larger than anything humans had built. Each vessel bristled with weapons that glowed with strange energy. Governor Vance ordered an immediate evacuation, but he knew the truth. There was not enough time. There were not enough transport ships. Most of his people would have to stay and face whatever came. Admiral Jack Lawson brought the 3rd Fleet to defend the colony. 47 warships jumped into the system and formed a defensive line between the Vorthax and New Haven. The crew members knew they were outgunned. They knew many of them would die, but not one of them suggested retreat. The battle began at dawn on New Haven. Vorthax plasma lances tore through human shields like they were made of paper. The carrier Resolute exploded in the first minutes of fighting. 2,000 sailors died in an instant. Admiral Lawson watched the destruction from his bridge and felt grief turn to anger in his chest. He ordered his ships to close the distance. Human weapons were weaker, but they could still do damage at close range. The fighting became brutal and desperate. Human destroyers rammed Vorthax cruisers. Pilots flew suicide runs into enemy gun batteries. Every death bought time for the evacuation below. Every sacrifice meant more civilians could escape. Commander Megan Torres flew her fighter through the chaos of battle. She was the leader of Shadow Wing and the best pilot in the fleet. Her squadron had been cut in half within the first hour. Her friends were dead. Her wingman was dead. But she kept fighting because that was what humans did. She saw the Vorthax flagship moving toward the planet. It was a massive vessel called the Arbiter's Will. If it reached firing position, it would burn cities to ash. Commander Torres made a decision. She told her remaining pilots to cover her. Then she flew directly toward the flagship. Her fighter was small and fast. She dodged plasma fire and weaved through defensive screens. The Vorthax did not expect a single fighter to attack their command ship. They thought it was suicide. They were right. But Commander Torres had a plan. She flew straight into the flagship's hangar bay. Inside, she found row after row of enemy fighters waiting to launch. She armed her reactor for overload. She thought about her family back on Earth. She thought about the people on New Haven who might survive because of what she was about to do. Then she smiled. The explosion tore through the heart of the flagship. The hangar bay became an inferno. Secondary explosions rippled through the vessel as fuel and ammunition cooked off. The Arbiter's will lost power and began to drift. Without their command ship, the Vorthax fleet fell into confusion. On the ground, Colonel Nathan Gray led the Marine defense. He was a hard man who had grown up in the slums of Chicago before joining the military. He had fought in every major conflict of the past 20 years. He had never lost a battle, and he was not going to start now. The Vorthax landed ground troops outside the capital city. They were tall and armored, and carried weapons that could vaporize a human with one shot. They expected their creations to cower. They expected humans to remember their place and submit. They did not expect what happened next. Colonel Gray and his Marines met the enemy in the streets. They fought with rifles and grenades and sometimes their bare hands. They used buildings as cover and sewers as tunnels. They turned every block into a death trap. For every Marine that fell, 10 Vorthax died. The aliens were shocked. They had conquered hundreds of worlds. They had crushed countless species under their boots. But they had never faced enemies who fought with such fury. The humans did not run when outnumbered. They did not surrender when wounded. They kept fighting until their last breath, and even then they tried to take enemies with them. One Vorthax commander sent a confused message to his superiors. He said the humans were fighting like animals. No. They were fighting like something worse. They were fighting like they had nothing to lose. They were fighting like beings who would rather die than live in chains. The battle lasted 3 days. 3 days of fire and blood and screaming. 3 days of heroism and sacrifice and death. When it was over, the Vorthax retreated. They had taken heavy losses. They had learned that their weapons had become something more than weapons. New Haven survived, but at a terrible cost. Half the colony was destroyed. 200,000 people were dead. The Third Fleet had lost half its ships. But they had won. Against all odds, they had won. Commander Torres was found alive in the wreckage of the flagship. She had ejected at the last moment and somehow survived. She woke up in a hospital ship with burns covering half her body. The first thing she asked was whether they had won. When they told her yes, she closed her eyes and slept. Colonel Gray buried his dead in a field outside the capital. He said no words over the graves. He did not need to. Their sacrifice spoke louder than any speech. But the victory came with a dark discovery. Dr. Kate Brennan examined the fallen Vorthax soldiers and their equipment. She found something that made her blood run cold. The genetic engineering the Vorthax had performed millions of years ago had left dormant triggers in human DNA. Kill switches buried deep in the genetic code. If activated, these switches could cause instant death, or they could be used to control human behavior, to make them obedient. The Vorthax had not used these triggers yet. Perhaps they wanted to reclaim their weapons intact. Perhaps they wanted to show humans they could be beaten in battle first. But the threat was real. At any moment, the Vorthax could flip a switch and kill every human in existence. Dr. Brennan reported her findings to Chancellor Porter. A new mission began immediately. Human scientists had to find a way to neutralize the genetic threat before the Vorthax decided to use it. The clock was ticking. The fate of humanity hung in the balance. The first battle was over. But the war was just beginning. Chancellor Ryan Porter stood before the council with heavy shoulders. The victory at New Haven had given humanity hope. But hope alone would not win this war. The Vorthax had thousands of ships. They had technology far beyond human understanding. They had ruled the galaxy for millions of years. Humanity could not fight them alone. He made a decision that would change everything. He sent Ambassador Laura Keene to find allies among the stars. Laura Keene was a woman of 50 years with gray hair and sharp eyes. She had spent her life negotiating treaties and ending conflicts. She had talked warlords into peace and tyrants into compromise. Now she faced her greatest challenge. She had to convince other species to join a war they could not win. Her first stop was the world of the Velthari. They were an avian species with beautiful feathers of blue and gold. They had been created by the Vorthax as artists and musicians. Their purpose was to bring beauty to the Dominion. When the Vorthax Empire fell, the Velthari had built a peaceful civilization based on harmony and non-violence. Ambassador Keen met with their leader in a garden filled with flowers that sang in the wind. She explained the situation. She told them about the genetic kill switches. She told them that the Vorthari carried the same triggers in their DNA. If humanity fell, the Velthari would be next. The Velthari leader listened with sad eyes. He said his people remembered the days of slavery. He said they had sworn never to fight again. Violence was against everything they believed. They could not help. Laura Keen did not give up. She asked them to consider what would happen if the Vorthax returned to power. Would the Velthari be allowed to live in peace, or would they be forced to create beauty for masters who saw them as property? The leader said he would think about it. Her next stop was the home of the Kryn. They were massive reptilian beings who stood 3 meters tall. The Vorthax had created them as laborers. They were strong and tough, and could work for days without rest. For generations they had built the great structures of the Dominion with their bare hands. The Kryn lived on a harsh world of rock and fire. Their cities were built into mountains. Their culture valued strength and endurance above all things. Ambassador Keen met with their council of elders in a chamber lit by rivers of lava. She made her case. The Kryn had the strength to fight. They had the numbers to make a difference. Together with humanity, they could stand against the Vorthax. The eldest Kryn spoke in a voice like grinding stones. He said his people remembered slavery. They remembered the whips and the chains. They remembered watching their children die in the mines. When the Dominion fell, they had sworn never to serve again, but they had also sworn never to fight. Fighting meant risking everything. Fighting meant giving the Vorthax a reason to return. Laura Keen understood their fear. But she also knew that fear would not save them. She told them that the Vorthax were coming whether the Kryn fought or not. The only choice was whether to face them standing or kneeling. The elders said they would discuss the matter. Her final visit was to the Sindari. They were a 4-armed species with quick minds and nimble fingers. The Vorthax had created them as technicians and engineers. They maintained the great machines of the Dominion. When the Empire collapsed, they had taken that knowledge and built their own advanced civilization. The Sindari were practical beings. They cared about facts and numbers and probabilities. Ambassador Keen met with their high calculator in a room filled with glowing screens and holographic displays. She presented her case with data and evidence. She showed them the Vorthax fleet strength. She showed them the human military capabilities. She showed them projections for the coming war. The high calculator studied the numbers with all 4 hands working at once. Then he asked a simple question. Could humanity win? Laura Keen was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke the truth. She said she did not know. The odds were against them. The enemy was stronger and more advanced. By every logical measure, humanity should lose. But humans had a quality that could not be measured. They had the will to fight beyond all reason. They had the spirit to stand when standing seemed impossible. The high calculator said the Sindari would need proof. They would need to see humans win a battle that they should lose. Only then would they commit their forces. While Ambassador Keen worked to build alliances, the Vorthax made their own move. High Arbiter Exelthron sent an emissary to Earth. He offered humanity a choice. They could accept limited autonomy as a warrior caste within the Dominion. They would fight for the Vorthax, but they would not be slaves. They would have some freedoms, some rights. It was better than extinction. Senator Greg Palmer supported the offer. He stood before the council and argued that survival mattered more than pride. He said humanity could not win this war. He said accepting the offer was the only logical choice. Many listened to his words. Many were afraid. Admiral Jack Lawson stood up to face him. He was still wearing bandages from the Battle of New Haven. He had lost friends in that fight. He had watched good people die. But he had also seen something that Palmer had not. He had seen humans fight with everything they had. He had seen them refuse to surrender even when death was certain. He told the council that the Vorthax had created humans to be warriors. They had given humans the fire of aggression and the steel of determination. But they had also given humans something they did not intend. They had given humans the capacity to choose. The warrior spirit they engineered now burned for freedom instead of conquest. Accepting slavery would betray everything that spirit represented. The council voted. The offer was rejected. Dr. Kate Brennan worked day and night with Sindari scientist Velcora to find a solution to the genetic kill switches. They studied human DNA and Vorthax technology. They ran thousands of simulations. Finally, they found an answer. A genetic therapy could neutralize the triggers. But it required a rare element called primordial essence. This element was found only in Vorthax-controlled space. Chancellor Porter authorized a mission. A small team would infiltrate enemy territory and steal the primordial essence. It was dangerous, and possibly suicidal. But it was the only way. The fate of all created species now rested on a handful of brave souls willing to fly into the heart of darkness. The stealth ship Silent Thunder slipped through enemy space like a ghost. It was small and black and designed to be invisible. Captain Cole Hendricks sat in the command chair and watched the stars drift past. He had volunteered for this mission knowing he might never return, so had everyone on his crew. Lieutenant Amy Rowan was his demolitions expert. She was a small woman with red hair and a talent for making things explode. Sergeant Ben Carter was his combat specialist. He was built like a tank and had fought in more battles than he could count. Dr. Lucas Vance was the field medic and geneticist. He would identify and extract the primordial essence once they found it. Their destination was Vorthax Prime, the ancient homeworld of their creators, the heart of the enemy empire. It was the most heavily defended planet in the galaxy. Defensive platforms circled it like angry wasps. Patrol fleets moved through the system in endless patterns. No one had ever infiltrated Vorthax Prime and lived to tell about it. Captain Hendricks studied the sensor readings for days. He looked for gaps in the defenses. He looked for patterns in the patrol routes. Finally, he found what he was looking for. The Vorthax were arrogant. They could not imagine their creations striking at their sacred homeworld. There was a small window in their coverage. A brief moment when a ship could slip through undetected. They made their approach on the dark side of the planet. The Silent Thunder descended through clouds of toxic gas and storms of acid rain. The Vorthax had let their homeworld become poisoned over millions of years. They lived in sealed cities beneath the surface now. The surface was a wasteland. The team landed near a genetic research facility. Dr. Vance had identified it as the most likely location for the primordial essence. They put on environmental suits and stepped out into the hellish landscape. Wind screamed around them. Lightning cracked the sky. The ground was black and dead. They found an entrance to the underground complex. Amy Rowan disabled the security systems with quick fingers. Ben Carter took point with his rifle ready. They moved through corridors carved from ancient stone. The walls were covered with murals showing the glory of the Vorthax Empire. Images of enslaved species bowing before their masters. Images of genetic experiments and engineered soldiers. Captain Hendricks felt sick looking at them. They reached the research facility, and what they found inside was worse than anything they had imagined. Row after row of cloning tanks stretched into the distance. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. And inside each tank floated a human body. They were modified and changed. Tubes ran into their skulls. Their eyes were open but empty. Dr. Vance examined the nearest tank, and his face went pale. The Vorthax were not just planning to activate kill switches. They were creating a new army. Human soldiers grown in tanks and programmed for obedience. These clones would have all the strength and aggression of natural humans, but none of the free will. They would be perfect weapons. Loyal only to their masters. Captain Hendricks took images of everything. The galaxy needed to know what the Vorthax were planning. Then he ordered his team to continue the mission. They had to find the primordial essence. They found it in a vault at the center of the facility. Glowing canisters of silver liquid sat on pedestals surrounded by security fields. Dr. Vance confirmed it was the right substance. Amy Rowan got to work on the security systems while Ben Carter watched the door. Time passed slowly. Every second felt like an hour. Finally, the security fields dropped, and Dr. Vance grabbed the canisters. They had what they came for. Now they had to escape. Amy Rowan had already planted charges throughout the facility. She was not going to let the Vorthax keep their clone army. When they were clear, she would trigger the explosives and destroy everything. They were halfway to the exit when the alarm sounded. Red lights flashed, sirens screamed, doors began to seal. Somewhere in the facility, Vorthax soldiers were mobilizing. The team ran. Ben Carter took the rear position. He was the slowest runner but the best fighter. When the first Vorthax soldiers appeared behind them, he opened fire. His rifle cracked, and aliens fell. But more kept coming. Always more. They reached a junction, and Carter stopped. He looked at Captain Hendricks with steady eyes. He said someone had to hold them here. Someone had to buy time for the others to reach the ship. Hendricks started to argue, but Carter just smiled. He said it had been an honor serving with them. Then he turned to face the enemy. The sounds of gunfire echoed through the corridors as the rest of the team ran. Carter fought like a demon. He killed dozens of Vorthax soldiers. He held that junction for 10 minutes, 10 precious minutes that let his friends escape. When his ammunition ran out, he fought with his knife. When his knife broke, he fought with his hands. The Vorthax finally brought him down, but not before he had proven that one human was worth 100 of them. Captain Hendricks and the others reached the Silent Thunder. They lifted off just as Vorthax fighters screamed toward them. Amy Rowan triggered her charges. Behind them, the research facility erupted in a massive explosion. Fire raced through the corridors. Cloning tanks shattered. The Vorthax clone army was destroyed before it could ever be used. The Silent Thunder fled through the chaos. Enemy ships pursued them. Plasma fire scorched their hull. But Hendricks was a good pilot, and luck was on their side. They reached the jump point and escaped into hyperspace. Behind them, Vorthax Prime burned. Captain Hendricks sent his report to Earth Command. He told them about the cloning facility. He told them about the Vorthax plans. He told them about Ben Carter's sacrifice. Then he sat alone in his cabin and wept for his fallen friend. Dr. Kate Brennan received the primordial essence and got to work immediately. Within days, she had synthesized the genetic therapy. Within weeks, it was being distributed across human and allied worlds. One by one, the kill switches were neutralized. The Vorthax had lost their greatest weapon. The news spread across the galaxy. The Velthari saw humans risk everything to save all created species. They voted to join the alliance. The Kryn heard about Ben Carter, standing alone against impossible odds. They recognized a warrior spirit that matched their own. They pledged their strength to the cause. The Sindari calculated the odds again with new data. Humans had infiltrated Vorthax Prime and survived. Perhaps victory was possible after all. They committed their fleets. The Vorthax response was swift and terrible. High Arbiter Exlalthron gathered every ship in his armada. He would crush these rebellious weapons once and for all. The final battle was coming. The Vorthax armada gathered at the edge of the Avalon system. 10,000 warships filled the void. Dreadnoughts the size of mountains. Carriers filled with fighters. Cruisers and destroyers beyond counting. It was the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history. High Arbiter Zelthron stood on the bridge of his new flagship called the Eternal Dominion. He looked at his forces and felt certain of victory. The Avalon system was humanity's heart. Earth orbited its yellow sun. Billions of humans lived on the homeworld and the colonies around it. If Avalon fell, humanity would be broken. The rebellion would end. The weapons would remember their place. Admiral Jack Lawson commanded the defense. He had every ship humanity could spare. He had the fleets of the Velthari and the Kryn and the Sindari. Together they numbered 3,000 vessels. They were outnumbered more than 3 to 1. But they were not afraid. The Allied fleet formed a line between the enemy and Earth. Humans stood beside Velthari and Kryn and Sindari. Species that had been created as servants now fought together as equals. They fought for something the Vorthax could never understand. They fought for freedom. Chancellor Ryan Porter addressed humanity from the steps of the United Earth Parliament. His voice was broadcast across every world in human space. He spoke of their journey through the ages, from primitive creatures struggling to survive to builders of cities and ships and dreams. He spoke of the truth they had learned, that they were created as weapons. But he also spoke of the choice they had made. They chose to be more than weapons. They chose to be people. He said that whatever happened today, humanity would never submit. Every man and woman would fight. Every child would know that their parents stood against tyranny. Win or lose, they would face their creators with dignity. They would show the galaxy what free people could do. His final words were simple. Today we fight not just for ourselves but for every species that was ever enslaved. Today we prove that the created can become greater than the creators. The battle began at sunrise over Earth. The Vorthax fleet advanced like a wall of death. Plasma lances fired across the void. Ships exploded on both sides. The Kryn dreadnoughts pushed forward into the enemy line. They were tough and strong, and they soaked up damage that would have destroyed human vessels. Their guns roared, and Vorthax cruisers died. The Velthari flew support ships that healed damaged Allied vessels. They had sworn never to fight, but they could still save lives. Their skills kept the fleet together when it should have crumbled. The Sindari used their technical genius to hack enemy systems. They turned Vorthax guns against Vorthax ships. They crashed enemy fighters into enemy carriers. Their 4 hands worked controls faster than any other species could manage. And the humans fought with everything they had. Commander Megan Torres led the fighter assault. Her body still carried scars from New Haven, but she flew like she had never been wounded. Her squadron was called the Unchained. They had painted broken chains on their fighters. They tore through Vorthax formations with reckless courage. Colonel Nathan Gray commanded the Marine forces. When the fleets engaged, he led boarding parties onto enemy vessels. His soldiers fought through corridors filled with Vorthax warriors. They captured ships and turned their guns against the Dominion fleet. The battle raged for hours. Ships died by the hundreds. Space itself seemed to burn with plasma, fire, and nuclear detonations. The Allied fleet was pushed back step by step. The Vorthax numbers were too great. Their firepower was too strong. Then the Eternal Dominion began its advance toward Earth. The Vorthax flagship was massive beyond imagination. It carried enough weapons to burn a planet to ash. High Arbiter Exelthron, intended to destroy the human homeworld as punishment for their rebellion. He wanted the other created species to see what happened to those who defied the Dominion. Admiral Lawson ordered everything they had to stop the flagship. Ships threw themselves against its shields. Fighters crashed into its guns. Nothing worked. The Eternal Dominion kept advancing. Earth grew larger in its view screen. Commander Torres saw what had to be done. She gathered her remaining pilots. They were tired and wounded and running low on ammunition. But they still had their courage. She told them they would punch a hole through the flagship's defenses. They would create an opening for the Marines. The Unchained made their final charge. Vorthax fighters swarmed around them. Defensive guns filled the space with death. One by one, her pilots fell. But they kept going. They fought through the storm and cleared a path to the flagship's hull. Colonel Gray and his Marines breached the Eternal Dominion. They fought through corridors filled with enemy soldiers. They lost men and women at every turn. But they pushed forward. Always forward, toward the command center. Gray reached the bridge with only a handful of soldiers left. There he faced the Vorthax Supreme Commander himself. Xelthron was ancient and powerful. He had lived for millions of years. He remembered creating the first humans. He had watched their species grow from primitive animals into something that dared to challenge him. He could not understand why. He asked Gray why the humans refused to serve. They had been created for this purpose. It was in their very nature to fight and obey. Why did they resist? Colonel Gray looked at the ancient being. He thought about everyone who had died. He thought about Ben Carter holding that corridor alone. He thought about the Marines who had followed him into this ship knowing they would not return. He thought about his own children waiting on Earth below. His answer was simple. He said they were no longer what the Vorthax had created. They had hopes and dreams. They loved their families. They mourned their dead, They wanted to build a future of their own choosing. They were not weapons anymore. They were people. And people would rather die than live as slaves. Gray activated the self-destruct sequence. He had rigged his own armor with explosives during the assault. The blast killed him and the Supreme Commander both. It triggered a chain reaction through the flagship. Secondary explosions ripped through the Eternal Dominion. The massive vessel broke apart in a ball of fire that lit up the sky above Earth. Without their command ship, the Vorthax fleet fell into chaos. Admiral Lawson pressed the attack. The Allied forces surged forward. The Dominion line collapsed. Ship after ship surrendered, or fled. The battle was won. In the aftermath, the created species formed a new alliance called the Free People's Compact. They swore to protect each other. They swore that no species would ever be enslaved again. Dr. Kate Brennan was appointed the first human representative. Her work had saved billions of lives across the galaxy. The Vorthax Dominion crumbled. Other enslaved species rose up across their territory. The empire that had lasted millions of years fell apart within months. The age of masters and servants was over. Admiral Lawson visited the memorial built for the fallen. The names stretched for miles. So many dead. So much sacrifice. He thought about what the Vorthax had intended humanity to be. Weapons. Tools. Things to be used and discarded. Instead, humanity had become something else. Defenders of the weak. Liberators of the enslaved. Champions of freedom. They were created as warriors. They chose to become heroes, and the galaxy would never forget.